I think Frank froze. Welcome to NLL Lacrosse Talk, everybody. I'm Gary Groob. Frank, are you with us?
I think so.
All right. Off you go, sir.
Okay. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. He's Gary Groob. And that is the goaltender for the Vancouver Warriors, Christian Bianco, also an NLL champion. Christian, thank you for joining us. I don't know what my mic problem was there, but it is what it is.
No, I appreciate you guys having me on. And like I said, I appreciate how organized you guys booking in advance and the structure. As someone who has a podcast, we're not nearly as organized, to say the least.
It's content anyway. Don't let that dissuade you. It's always about the content. And thanks to you and others like you, we have some really good content here. We talk to lacrosse and the game, and we talk about everything under the sun about lacrosse. But Christian, what brought you to lacrosse? What made you pick up a stick?
You know, I had an older brother who was also a goalie, and I think it's just kind of the monkey see, monkey do, right? I think he was a goalie, and I decided that, I want to be a goalie too. And my parents luckily supported it, although I think having two goalies as a parent in any sport isn't the most ideal thing. A lot of stress for them. And from there, just being a Coquitlam guy, right, it was kind of one of the main sports in our city, right? You watch some of those junior teams and senior teams before us with the Dane Dobies, the Westbergs, Ben McIntosh, Robert Church. It's just kind of the sport to play in our city, fortunately.
Yeah, and being a goaltender and having one in the family can be expensive. I can't imagine what it's like to have two. The cost is pretty prohibitive.
Yeah, I think that, and I was luckily, me and my brother are pretty similar sizes, so there's kind of some hand-me-downs. There's some alternating of gear here and there, but our parents were unreal to us, right? They always kind of got us the best gear, got us what we needed to succeed, and not only that, just getting us to practices and coaching and all of that. They were kind of above and beyond.
So we know why and how you got involved. How about what kept you in it? What's kept you in the game? What is it that after you joined and after you started playing that grew on you?
I think probably at an early age, right? It's the friends. It's all those guys that you meet growing up and you kind of build these relationships with, and that kind of becomes your core circle, right? That you hang out with at high school, middle school, all of that. So I'd say early on, that was definitely a big part of it, and it's an awesome part of our game. But I think the secondary thing is like success, right? Like the more success you have at something, the more winning you do, like the more enjoyable it is, right? The more time you want to put in and all of that. So I think as much of it, some of it is kind of that more sentimental stuff. I think there is a psychological thing of, hey, I'm doing good at this. I want to keep doing it.
Can I drill down on that? Just one more, and then Gary will take over. What is it specific? I mean, it's easy to say winning is great, but what is it about? What would you say about winning that most people might not realize, might not get, that is what makes winning so good?
Yeah, I think it's just, it's like getting the result, right? I think you put in so much time, so much work, and I think winning in our industry is as good as a paycheck, right? It kind of shows that, hey, everything that I've done was worth it, right? And I think once you get a taste of that and that standard, it's just like, it's addicting. You want to keep chasing it, keep chasing it. And when you don't win your last game of the year and you don't win a championship, it feels like you didn't do your job. So I think that's something, just the more you win, the more accustomed you become to that feeling, the less I think you really appreciate it, but the more you miss it when you don't have it.
No, I appreciate being validated. Now let's see what your history is like, Gary.
I want to go back to the beginning, really. And, growing up in Coquitlam, to me, that's being an Ontario kid. I always put that towards like Orangeville. The rock stars of the town, everybody shoots towards becoming part of the junior A team. In fact, talking to a lot of guys who are from Orangeville, that was almost more important than being drafted to the NLL, was being on the junior A team. Is it the same when you're growing up in Coquitlam?
I think definitely for my age group, it kind of felt like that, right? I think just especially we're in kind of that prime age group that we got to watch the 2010 Minto Cup in Coquitlam. And like those were the superstars tests, right? And then you see those guys go pro and kind of how good they all are. So that kind of set this gold standard that, well, you want to play junior in Coquitlam because you have a chance to win a Minto Cup. And it's kind of that history that is now become a little more prevalent in Coquitlam with the recent success of our junior team
Right.
currently.
Right. And you had a chance to watch guys like Dane Doby, Nick Rose, Robert Church, all these guys come up around you and really set the gold standard, as you said, on what to be an elite player.
Yeah, and I think it's something that when you're a kid, you don't really realize, right? Like you don't realize that Dane Doby is one of the greatest goal scorers of all time. You don't realize that Nick Rose is, I think, second all time and wins in the NLL now or whatever it is, right? So these are guys that they're Hall of Famers, and for us, they were just a guy that you walked 15 minutes down the road to go watch on a Saturday night.
Right. What do you think sets apart Coquitlam as a program that puts so many great players out there?
I think there is like the history of it, but I think a lot of it is just my age group especially, we were fortunate to have Pat Coyle had a kid the same age as me. So our minor lacrosse coach was Pat Coyle, right? One of the greatest defenders of all time. Right. So when you have that kind of coaching and structure from a young age, I find that really builds up. And then once you go to junior, rather than learning stuff that you're normally learning at junior, you've already established that base at a minor lacrosse and feeder standpoint. But I do think there's also a big part of it, I know in BC, is just where young families can afford to live, right? And for my age group, Coquitlam was still kind of one of those cities that younger families could afford to live. And we're slowly seeing that move out to kind of the Langleys. And then probably after that will be Chilliwack, right? So just your minor lacrosse numbers are higher in terms of enrollment and how many kids you have in the program.
Right. Now, as a young kid, did you see yourself in that program, becoming a junior A Adnec?
I think probably like the second to last year or year minor, right? You kind of really start to hang around them a little bit more. I think my second year midget or U17, whatever it was at the time, I practiced once or twice at the juniors, and like that was just like, oh my God, right? To me, it was the coolest thing. And seeing my brother play a little bit of Coquitlam Junior and then Poco Junior was kind of that next step.
Right. And you had success in Bantam. You and a bunch of guys that wound up coming up with you and winning the championship there, getting that taste, and now you're bringing it up into junior.
Yeah, it was fun. And I think it's the fun part of that whole thing is just seeing kind of how many of that group from our Bantam team has progressed to the pro lacrosse level now, right? Like you look at the Reed Bowerings, Ethan Tysers, right? Like guys like that are now playing at the next level.
Right. Now you joined your Adnex at a young age. What do you think was the biggest adjustment coming into junior A that you may or may not have expected?
I think it definitely, the bigger nets were a little bit of an adjustment. I think they didn't hurt me as much as maybe some of the bigger goalies that didn't move as much. But I think it's just like that next level of how good the shooters were. The one thing I will say I found easier in my early years in junior, because I was like the young kid, there was like no pressure, right? When like you're kind of a first year out of 5 years or second year out of the 5 years, you don't have quite as much pressure as when you're, say, a second to last year guy that you're supposed to be the big dog. So it was definitely something early on. I got to kind of run with it and not have nearly the pressure I did later in my junior career.
Right. Well, we go into year 3 and you win the championship and you were just absolutely lights out. And that's pretty much when you became on my radar, starting to watch you pretty much as I could from Ontario. And talk about that year, 2016, and what all came together that made that run so magical.
Yeah, we had a ton of success in the regular season. I don't think we lost a game that year. And then we go to the BC finals and we fell short to a good team in Delta that made obviously some pretty big pickups. And I think kind of going into that Minto Cup, there's that little bit of doubt. And I don't think we were nearly as talented as maybe Orangeville and Delta were in terms of like an NLL talent standpoint. But I think we just had so many role players that just were bought in, so many soldiers like Nico McNabb, a guy who was like a junior B for the majority of the season who played up. Like he played every game of the finals, right? Stuff like that. Just guys were getting to the areas they needed to and just weren't being denied, right? Whether there was a talent deficit or not.
Right. 2017, could have been a second year, but you ran into an absolute buzzsaw with Six Nations, the all-star team of the Minto.
Yeah.
But 2018, you're back on the winning track. That was really a weird one, with all the controversy with Jeff and Dan Teat and all the other things. But you guys, when you guys were playing, were on the top of the mark. You were lights out in that again, and your whole team just rose to the top, beating a really talented Brampton squad.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same thing that the reality is if you look at the two lineups, like we had some very good players too. But, like there's Jeff T, Clark Pedersen, Boudreau, Biles, Maduros, like all these guys on their team. So they probably have more NLL talent if you look at the two rosters. But I just think we kind of had that winning culture. We had so many guys that were sprinting on and off the floor. And it's just kind of those little things that in junior make a lot bigger of a difference than at the pro level.
Right. We move into going into pro, and you were taken actually off guard being drafted by Calgary. I think you thought you were being redrafted by Vancouver, if I read it right. And Calgary gets you 15th. What did Molosky talk to you about when he first got you? Because you guys knew each other already from Coquitlam.
Yeah, he kind of had called me after, and I was obviously a little taken off guard because I think at that point I thought I was going to the Vancouver Stealth when they were out in Langley there. But I remember kind of going into my first training camp in Calgary, and him and Bob McMahon had kind of pulled me aside, and they just said, hey, listen, like, we're not expecting it to be like snap of the fingers easy. Like, you're going to struggle, and that's okay, but just listen to those two older guys, right? And I was very fortunate to have Mike Poulin, who's arguably one of the most liked guys in the NLL, and Frank Shiglianu, right, who's just two true professionals. So there's definitely some struggles early on for me, and I was fortunate to have guys like that to lean on and help with the transition.
I can give you a little story to show you how small a community this really is Frank, when he was apprenticing to be a plumber out in BC, he actually apprenticed under my cousin.
Small world. Yeah, small world. Yeah, especially with lacrosse, right?
Yeah, definitely. Talk about being under those guys and, kind of easing your way into the Calgary lineup, because again, it's daunting to come up from junior and into the NLL right away.
Yeah, I think I was a victim of everything being too easy in junior. Like, I think there was a lot of success. I was always on a very strong team with really good defenses, and I don't think I was challenged as much. So I think early on in my career, I had some really tough games, right? I had games where like I was getting outclassed, and it was pretty clear that I wasn't ready to play at that level. And I think that was a struggle that I probably needed at that point in my career, right? To kind of give me a bit of a reality check and a gut check of just how hard it is and just how good the guys at the pro level are, right? And then obviously I was fortunate enough that Calgary was invested enough into me to give me some time and give me more chances, and then eventually to win the starting job there.
Right. What do you think really got you through that stretch? Just perseverance, or?
I think just the guys, right? I think there was a lot of guys that probably knew that I was a younger guy that was a little more fragile, that they knew when I had a bad game when to pick me up, and then they kind of knew when they could kind of tell me to give me a gut check and stuff like that. And I would say Dane Doby was probably a big part of that. I think he was pretty aware at that point as a leader on the team of kind of how fragile I might have been at times and how fragile I wasn't at times. So I think he was definitely big for that transition in my career.
What do you think was the big aha moment where you said, I belong here? This is my place.
It was probably, I think we were in Toronto, and I think that was probably my first win playing in the ACC at that point. And I think that was probably like the first, like, okay, like, you know what, like I knew I could do this, right? And I think for the longest time, like, you're struggling to get that first win, you're struggling to kind of get that validation, and you just kind of keep grinding it out. And I think once I finally got that one off my back, I think it felt like I was rolling.
Right. Now we get into the 2019 season, and everything aligns. The stars align. You guys have just an absolute fantastic team. You go into Buffalo in the finals, and you are the heavy underdogs. You go in and you absolutely shut down a powerful Banis lineup in Buffalo in game one. Let's talk about that, and let's talk about just the feeling as that game was going along.
Yeah, I think that's another one of those situations that maybe being a young kid like made it easier, right? Like you kind of don't feel as much pressure. You're just kind of like, okay, like I'm going to go swing for the fences here, right, and hope it hits, right? So I think we had a very good veteran defense with a lot of big bodies, a lot of guys that kind of were very good communicators and good at kind of taking certain lanes and give me the looks I want. And I think once you had that momentum of stealing one in Buffalo, I think deep down you knew, hey, we don't want to, although we won here, you don't want to go back to Bandit Land for game 3. So when we went home, it was kind of that feeling of, okay, we need to get this done.
And the second game was another one. It was just as a fan at the edge of our seats for the entire game. You go into overtime, and then you have just an absolutely crazy bunch of results there where you wind up making a save or one of your
Zach Currier makes a save, yeah.
And you come back and just the whole thing. And then you wind up scoring the overtime goal, and here you are hoisting the cup. Just incredible.
Yeah, it was awesome. And I think just that, like, not that we're not a pro sport, like that's the closest we'll ever feel to the NHL for some of us, right? Like having the Saddle Dome with 18,000 fans in it, and just like I remember Pacer and some of the other old guys talk about there's a TV timeout in the fourth, and like people were jumping or like stomping their feet or something, and like it felt like the arena was vibrating. So I think that's kind of one of those things that when you get older, you're really going to kind of remember as one of those key moments of your career.
Yeah, I've been to the press box in Bandit Land when they were winning, and I tell you, it feels like the roof is rumbling, which is a little unnerving when you're in the roof.
Yeah,
a long way down. But and it's deafening, absolutely deafening. And Calgary was the same thing, absolutely deafening. And again, you guys win the cup, 2-0. Absolutely, I would say shocked the world. But looking at you guys all look like you belong there, and you earned it 100%. Talk about that initial moment. You got the cup. Here it is.
Yeah, I think there's just there was a lot of veterans in Calgary. I think that was Curtis's first win right after a pretty great career he was already having at that point. I know he's gone on to score probably another 400 points since then, but I think it's just a big part of like kind of getting over the hump. There's a lot of really talented teams that don't end up winning. Like there's a certain level of skill set and talent and all of that you need, but you do need a little bit of ball luck and a little bit of things to go your way. So I think we were fortunate, but it was just an electric atmosphere and feeling, and a pretty special group to do it with.
Absolutely. Now we head into COVID and everything stops. The world stops. How do you keep yourself going and keep yourself sharp while you're off?
We had an XLL league out west that was kind of like, it was like a very structured beer league would be my description of it. But it was hilarious because you'd have senior C guys playing with NLL players, right? So I played a bunch of player in that league, and I think that was something that was super fun because guys who are playing pro are now playing with guys that maybe, hey, I was on the same Pee Wee A2 team as them and stuff like that. So it was a very good little community thing, especially at that point when we were kind of all just coming out of lockdown.
Right. Now we keep going, and you by 2023, 2024, you've announced that your life is in Coquitlam, and you want to move back, and you want to get out of Calgary, and it doesn't work so smooth. So you jump over to the ALL. Now I do media for the ALL East here, and I love the league. I think it's just fantastic on teaching someone to become a pro and stay a pro. It's put something like 35 players into the NLL over the number of years it's been around. Talk about going in there to keep yourself sharp while all of this other stuff is working itself out.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you have to humble yourself a bit, right? And you have to say, I'm not too good for this. And the reality is I need to stay sharp. And the more that I played in that league, the more you realize how good some of the players are that don't get a chance to play in that all, right? And how good some of these young guys are. And like I said, even some of those older guys that never got their shot and luck. So I had a great time in it. There was awesome team that I played with, the ALL Grizzlies, right? The guys I still am in a group chat with, joking around. And I think they were definitely rooting for me once I finally got traded. But that's something that I'm very, very grateful that I got the opportunity to do. And I did do, right? I think if I sat out in that whole time period, I probably would have not been handling the holdout nearly as well.
Right. Well, you get into Vancouver, and boy, do you make an impression there. I believe you went undefeated the rest of the season in Vancouver. Obviously, ALL kept you sharp. Talk about going back in with Molosky and that, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of said to somebody just with like the media push and all of that week that I got traded, like that first game versus Toronto was probably the most pressure I've ever felt in my career, and I kind of did that to myself by the holdout and all of that. But I remember going into that game just thinking, what a game this would be to throw up a stinker out of any of them. So I went out there and I definitely wanted to give a good result for the owners, right, and Dax Aquilini, and kind of just show my value and kind of prove them right. And that's something I constantly feel in debt to them, that I always want to make sure that I make them look good and make sure it looks like it was a good trade for their team.
Right. Well, over the off season, they've put an awful lot of energy into bringing back the 2019 Calgary team. They brought you back a number of players that you're very familiar with, as well as a bunch of up and comers that were really on Molosky's list in the first place, which has made you a really big contender now. So in comes the pressure again, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a fun thing, and I think that's one thing when I came over to Van, you don't really know, right? Not that you're expecting people to follow, but you kind of know, hey, it's a home city for a lot of guys. And sorry, around Michael there, that's funny. But I just think that it's one of those things as guys start coming, it's kind of like that sigh of relief that, okay, we can do this here. We can make this a location that guys want to be. And I think once guys start having kids and you start seeing like Curtis Dixon out there on the floor with his kid on the glass, right, and warm up, stuff like that, not that it matters that much, but it makes a big difference for those memories long term in the game.
Right. Is your role now obviously starting goalie, but is your role also to bring Connor O'Toole into the fold? They're kind of like what Poulin and Skiggs did for you.
Yeah, he's awesome, and I think he's one of those kids that you can tell that his dad is one of the greatest goalies of all time, right? Just from an IQ standpoint, the way he sees the game, the way he works towards the game, like he just kind of has that pro-ready attitude and approach. I think is probably my biggest compliment on him, and I think he's going to have a ton of success in this league once his time comes.
Right. Let's talk about the culture there. Now, of course, with Molosky, you got the same coaches as before, Bob McMahon, Rob Williams, everybody's there. But even the culture with the fan base now that you're playing in mainland, that really helps the team build.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I think there's a lot of us growing up in Vancouver that we're invested in. We want this to be a successful business, right? We want this to be a sport that we're getting 10,000 fans to every game. So a lot of us are super committed to that, and I think it's just like one of those things that when you go to a game and you see it kind of trending in the right direction, it feels good, and it feels like it should be in a province that has so many people playing lacrosse.
That's always been the thing, is like, why wasn't the attendance there? Because it's been such a hotbed, especially in summer, such a hotbed of lacrosse. And then, of course, we had Langley, and we talked about it off air being a difficult place to get to. Whereas right now you're in downtown, very easy to get to, and away you go. Do you think that it's got the younger crowd interested now as well?
Yeah, I think like we kind of talked about that bar crowd / beer crowd. I think it definitely helps with the commuting, but I think we also talked about it before the show. Like Vancouver is a city that likes winners, right? There's a lot of stuff to do here, a lot of sporting teams, a lot of different activities between the mountains, the ocean, all that. So if your team's 1-12, people aren't showing up, right? If you're 12-3, people might start coming. So that's a big thing that we have to realize in a city like Vancouver.
Right. Now, we have one more championship to talk about. Of course, you had Senior B back in 2024 and suited up for Ladner. And again, what a performance you had in the finals. That's something that we still talk about. We talked about it even in this President's Cup, about stealing the show and winning that championship. Talk about getting on with the Ladner team and a good playing at home too.
Yeah, I don't think I really knew what I was signing myself up to with the whole Senior B circuit, right? So in the actual BC league, I was definitely frustrated at times just because we were dominating. And I was kind of looking at Tyler Pace like, man, like, what did you talk me into here? Like, why are we doing this? But then you go to the President's Cup and you just it's just a grind of a tournament. All these teams are loaded up with pro talent, and you kind of realize that, hey, this is like a really hard tournament to win, not only from a talent standpoint, but just like staying healthy and getting through the actual full week. I think it's like 7 games in 6 days or whatever it is.
Yeah, to me, it's a bigger grind than the Man Cup, to tell you the truth, because it's just ridiculous the way the structure of the tournament is, and everybody flying in, and everything happens this fast. But
Yeah.
Ladner, this was a three-peat at that point, and even more pressure to win.
Yeah, especially going back to Ladner, I think there was a lot of that. And it's a city that just like they're diehard senior B, right? Like we kind of in Coquitlam, I think when I first came there, I was kind of like why are we all invested in this so much? But you see kind of some of the guys like Ryan Keith that grew up around it, and like for him, like that's his Stanley Cup, right? So seeing him win and him lift the cup, and then seeing Ryan Benesh or whoever it was in the stands with the trophy and all the people in the community surrounding and supporting their team is a pretty awesome thing.
Right. The one we haven't talked about, of course, is summer ball in WLA, and you have been a mainstay with Coquitlam for the majority of the of your career. And the one thing that always stands out to myself and my guys on our Sunday show is just how much rubber you get to see in a game, because you, on an average, get about 60, 65 shots, and that's daunting week in, week out, week in, week out, and to have such a great average sure keeps you sharp.
Yeah, you know what? It's one thing going back to Coquitlam this summer was an awesome feeling, right? Just going back to that familiar arena. It's like it's 10 to 15 minutes from my parents' house walking. So it's a pretty fun feeling, right? Just going back to that dressing room. And obviously we had some success this year, and I don't think we were necessarily like this superstar team that had all this talent, but we had a lot of young guys who had career summers that have kind of got themselves drafted into the NLL and stuff like that. And it was fun to kind of just like grind out games and kind of have that blue collar mentality of, you know what, we don't have the payroll of some other teams, but we're just going to go swing for the fence.
Right. You know, you've seen this game at every level. You've had success at basically every level. From your perspective, where is lacrosse right now as opposed to when you began?
You know what, I think from how organized our ownerships are, I would say it's night and day, just kind of seeing the way the league's progressing and growing. And I think there's some markets that our fan bases are growing tremendously. There's some markets where it's kind of tailing off. And I don't know what the answer is to all those, but for most part of us being professional athletes, it's probably the most it's ever felt like, where it's like, hey, you know what, this is pretty legitimate. We're treated well. Our travel, all of that is structured well, and obviously salaries are trending slowly in the right direction. But it's one of those things that we definitely have to grow with owners, and hopefully kind of we see some of these markets start to rather pick back up or find different markets to have that success in.
Right. Well, we had Nick Sakavitz on a number of years ago. He was talking about the NLL was basically where the NHL was around 75 or 76. It was starting to get the TV deals. It was already structured enough with the teams. It just hadn't had the big explosion yet. Do you see that coming in the near future?
You hope, right? I think it's when you look at lacrosse, right? It offers so much from, like, if you like basketball, it's similar plays. If you like hockey, it's the similar kind of speed and the bit of violence, right, with the hitting and stuff like that does sell. So I think it's one of those things that we just need to get the exposure out there, which I think the league's doing a great job of. And the best case is when that is on, like, say, ESPN or TSN or one of those, you hope it's in Buffalo, or you hope it's in Calgary, you hope it's in Van, right? Or Colorado, where you see, okay, you flip on the TV, there's 10,000 people watching this. Maybe I want to watch this too, right? So I think that's definitely a big thing as our league grows.
We've also talked about it before on the show, is that to have it on linear TV where a bar owner can flip TSN on and have the game on and just watch the crowd, because I've seen it many times where the conversation all of a sudden goes right to the screen, and the way it is, most addictive thing I've ever seen.
Yeah,
I used to do it as a test with a laptop and watch everybody come over my shoulders.
Yeah, it's massive. And I think the big thing, right, is I think we had that Bleacher Report deal a while ago. And I think that was something that maybe the league was getting a bit of money to have that deal. But, like, we're at the point that if we can just get it on these big TVs, right, and all these big broadcasters, like, and getting it out to the masses, that's our best case scenario.
Right. Do you think the league's missing the boat with not having an all-star game? We've talked about this with a number of things, and the funny thing is usually it's the player saying, "Yeah, I'd love to play it." It's the management going,
Well, I think there's the financial side of it, right? That the reality is, like I don't know, you'd have to put it in a market like Buffalo, right, where it's going to be a winner. It's going to sell some tickets and be profitable to fly all the people in. I think the other side of it, I think our league's still only playing 18 games. There probably is that little bit of owners or management being worried about injuries and stuff like that, right? You lose a guy
Right.
for 5 games, that's almost, so it's a quarter of your season almost. So I think there's a lot of stuff like that you have to take into the whole picture. But it seems like players would love it. But if it is going to happen, it has to be one of those markets where it's going to be a winner from a financial standpoint, ticket sales.
Well, Frank came up with an idea a couple of years ago, and I love it. And it was that the winner of the championship hosts the game, and it gives them 6 months to market it. And you play against the NLL All Stars, which puts a little more emphasis on the game because nobody wants to lose to the champion, and the champions sure don't want to lose to the All Stars of the league. And that puts a little more emphasis on it. And then, of course, all the skills and the other thing to be halftime.
Yeah,
More
there's
of
a
a
lot of
selling
stuff
point.
like that. I think the other thing too, you could do like the baseball. I think it is where you still the home fields up for grab and playoffs, stuff like that. Like if you do a West versus East, but there's a lot to it, right? I think especially now that we have unified standing, stuff like that. There's no right or wrong, but it's something that it feels like it could be a success, but you never really know until we try.
Right. The Olympics coming up. First off, what's your thoughts on sixes? I can't see it being a big positive being a goalie.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's just one of those things that it's getting it out across the world, right? It's not just it's a little more accessible with the smaller field. I think it's a little more entertaining than field lacrosse, personally, just because it's kind of a basketball tempo and pace. It's not as much of a possession game. But then the day, like, there's no such thing as bad exposure, right? Like, we're getting out there. It's getting out to the mass. It's getting out to different countries. And I think that's how we're going to see our game grow.
Right. Do you think that maybe we should be looking maybe at a Winter Olympics and doing box instead, where there's not as many events and you have the arenas available, and maybe push on that particular part of the sport?
It would be nice, but I think it's just the reality is, like, especially I think with Asia and some of those countries, right, where it's hockey rinks aren't as common of a thing. There's a little more limited access, right? So I think like you look at the world box, right? Like there's tons of teams and it's growing constantly, it feels like. So that's trending in the right direction. But I think until we hit a point where it's a little more accessible for everyone, we won't see the box game take off on that same kind of world stage.
Right.
The important, can I just on the subject of the All-Star game and getting interest, there has to be a hook, and the hook for me is if you can guarantee that people who don't normally watch lacrosse will watch, then the investment the teams have to make and the organizations have to make, with the possibility of losing a player, there has to be a high upside. That to me is the tough part to negotiate, because no team, like you said, Christian, wants to lose a player for 5 games.
Well, and then I think the other side of that too is like how's your revenue share, right? Like if Buffalo's hosting and organizing it and marketing it and doing all these things, like it would only be fair that they get majority of the profits from the ticket or the gate, all that stuff. So I think it's one of those things that there's just a lot of language and a lot of different things that you'd have to work through before you could really go for it.
Yeah, you'd have to go big or go home. You can't just throw out an all-star game nowadays and expect people to show up, because all-star games have such a bad reputation.
Yeah, it's the kind of coast around is the whole thing, right? And I think they used to do the all-star game at like fun locations. Like I think they went to Australia one year, and I think half the guys were showing up a quarter into the game, I heard. So I don't think we did ourselves any favors from that standpoint. We won't be going to the Bahamas or Hawaii for it. I think it'll probably be one of those markets that we know there's going to be some good return.
And the last thing I want to add on that score is if like what happened with hockey, they turned it into an international tournament. If it was possible to do something like that, because then that would bring in a lot of new eyes to see the game. That's the biggest challenge I think that lacrosse has, is how does it reach the new viewers?
I think that's definitely something you could do, especially at the NLL level. And I think the reality is if you structure it that way, guys are going to want to win, right? Like it's going to be the same thing as worlds in the international game where it's like you want to prove that Canada's supreme or prove that America's supreme, that kind of stuff. And I think that kind of, not animosity, but that competitive edge might draw a lot more people to watch.
Well, you're being nice. Of course there'd be animosity. You're just being nice, Christian. I'm not going to argue with you about that, but I'm just going to say, from my nasty perspective, there's nothing that gets the hate on more than international competition.
Yes.
but it also raises the interest at the same time, and that's what makes it so, engageable for the fans, because essentially what you're doing is you're trying to reach new fans, and that's the ultimate challenge for sports like lacrosse.
100%.
Now, of course, talking to the international thing, you played with Team Canada, of course, at the box championships. I have been doing the Rebeski tournament for the last number of years and having a chance to watch European lacrosse start elevate. What do you think? You think that eventually is going to be like hockey, where if we're not careful in North America, how it becomes?
I think it's one of those things that you hope, right? We hope that we get to that point that they're kind of pushing us and pressing up on us. And I think it's one of those things that when you go to the worlds, like as like Canada, US, like the bigger nations, right? Like you feel like you're doing joint practice with Japan and seeing how far along they've came at the box level and the field level. And I think they placed 3rd and 6th a while ago. So you see kind of these countries, the investment and interest and them catching up. So that's something that we can only hope, right? As much as you always want to win, it's better for the game the more competitive teams we have.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny you bring up Japan because that's the team that actually turned my head altogether when I was doing the fields, and I thought that they should have been in the same class group as the U.S. and Canada. They may not have been able to beat them, but they were probably number 4 behind Haudenosaunee, Canada, U.S. from what I saw, and they're all homegrown, which is the other thing that really turned my head.
And they're just so fundamental. And I think you just see the commitment, right? Like there's a couple Japanese guys that we've had come out to BC and play senior B or play senior A, like Toru. I'm not even going to attempt his last name because I'll butcher it, but you see him playing Langley last summer and the success he has. And then even playing with him in the ALL, like I would look at him sometimes like, Toru, like we need you to shoot. Like we need you to shoot the ball 7 to 10 times a game. Like you're one of our guys. So seeing him at the world level and just kind of seeing how committed they are moving out to BC, moving to Ontario, moving to the States to kind of get more exposure and learn the game further. It's not really a coincidence that they're starting to build and have that success.
Yeah, we've had the same in Ontario. I had Coach Nakamura and 4 or 5 of his students, quote unquote, that he brought up here to play ALL, and they're fantastic and fast. And they spend all that extra time, all the little things, doing all the little things, practicing every little detail. So they're going to be moving up a lot quicker than guys who are just kind of taking it for granted.
Yeah, 100%. And I think they're like culturally, there's less ego. They're more coachable, I feel like, and just kind of that bought into that team mentality.
Right. Do you see this becoming a full-time gig at some point?
I don't know if it'll be in my career. I think probably 5 to 10 years after me, I do see it getting to that point. I think there's going to be a interesting transition period where it's going to be, hey, you're going to make $80,000 a year and you're going to be a pro lacrosse player. And I think for some guys, they're going to be, that's awesome. This is sweet. Like I can hang out. I can play the game I love. For other guys who kind of have the quote unquote big boy jobs, I think there will be that kind of decision of, hey, this is what I want to do, or am I going to focus on my life after lacrosse? So I don't think it's like we snap our fingers and we're all making 250 grand or we're all making 300 grand. Like there's going to be a growth period where we're kind of on that fence of full-time salary or not full-time salary for some guys.
I always worry that we would lose people who are really invested in their jobs, first responders, people like that, or guys who are heavy into business. That it's just, okay, we got our education doing lacrosse and now see ya.
Yeah. And I think there's doctors, there's all this stuff, but I think it does come down a little bit to where you live and what your financial situation is and what you need to get by, right? Like I know the Vancouver market, the Toronto market, like these markets that a ton of our players live in aren't necessarily cheap places to live, right? So I think there will be a side of it that's not only, hey, what do I want to do? Because we'd all want to play lacrosse, but it's, hey, what do I have to do to make ends meet?
Right. The other question I have, which is an interesting one, is what would happen to the summer game with a full-time NLL season?
Yeah, I think you'd probably see it kind of progress to more the ALL structure, right? Where you see it as more of a farm league, and that's a part of it, right? And I know there's the conversation of how much some guys are making in the summer now of, oh, are they going to pick one or the other? But I think that's one of those things that when the NLL is making decisions, they can't really determine it on, hey, what is this going to do to the WLA or what is this going to do to the MSL, right? They need to operate as their own entity in business. So that's I don't think we're near that, but when the time comes, they'll make the decision that they need to for the league.
Right. Now, being one who's played in all of these leagues, the biggest kerfuffle I have is I love summer ball. I think it's a great league. MSL, WLA, I love watching it. I think it's more of a grinding league. Why can't we get butts in the seats?
I think it's just kind of one of those things. I mean, in the West, it seems like it's slowly getting a little bit better, and you kind of have that community feel and vibe to it. You see New West really succeed. You see Victoria really succeed from a ticket sales standpoint. But I do think it's one of those things that it's just like guys are so used to going down the street and watching Dane Dobie play and stuff like that, or going to watch somebody play for $15 that they take it for granted sometimes, right? They'll say, oh, I'm just going to go start watching in playoffs, stuff like that. So I think it's one of those things that we kind of got to get more of that season ticket vibe and that faithful fan that like the Peterboroughs, the Victoria, and the New West have.
Right. I always look as if they can align with something close to them in the NLL and just remind fans that there is more lacrosse after the season's over. I'm hoping that Oshawa does that for Brooklyn and does that for the Whitby things, and so that in Ontario it keeps growing, because nothing is more depressing than to walk into one of these arenas and be one of 10 people in the stands
with
watching
pro players
NLL
playing.
Yeah, for $10.
Yeah. And I think that's something we see in the West, that the Warriors, I know, have some sort of contract or some sort of relation with the WLA where they really kind of co-market, which I think is awesome, right? And I think, like you said, if we're going to see both leagues succeed, that's something you need, right? They need to kind of team up a little bit and try to promote each other in the off seasons.
Right. What's one thing you'd like to see change for the sport long term to help it grow?
That's hard to say. I would say that there has to be kind of, I think our biggest thing for the box game will be accessibility, right? Like the more that we can get it out to kind of some of these other countries that maybe haven't seen it as much, or kind of go like the pro guys that, right? I know there's a lot of guys that had opportunities to work with Hong Kong lacrosse and stuff like that. So the more kind of outreach we can do, the bigger we'll see the game grow on a global standpoint, which also will help it kind of locally in Canada and the States in North America.
Right. Have you looked into doing coaching, or are you coaching to try and help
I coach some goalie camps with the Warriors, and then with my old teammate in Calgary, Tyler Pace. And then I think I'll be helping out with Burnaby Jr. this year a little bit just as an advisor. But I kind of always stay around the arenas, and I kind of talk to a lot of parents, a lot of the goalies, stuff like that. So it's definitely a little bit harder as somebody who runs a business and is still actively playing summer lacrosse. I think once my summer playing career slows down, I think I'll probably look on taking on more of a full-time coaching gig.
Right. What's the message you would give to the junior people trying to get involved and trying to make it to the pros?
I'd just say that's one of those things where you get out what you put in, right? I think it's not a coincidence. I think a lot of these people, they always say that, like, you're watching this guy, he's so talented, he shows this. Like, there's a lot of very talented players out there. If you look across the NLL and some of these top guys, like all of them, it's just like a standard thing that they're one of the hardest workers you see in the game, right? They just all kind of have that, and it's like a bare minimum box that they all check. So I think that's one thing that's a controllable variable for those junior kids, that it's not a coincidence. The more you work, the more results you're going to get.
Right. One of the things that have been brought up is that we spend an awful lot of money, both in the U.S. and in Canada, on club teams and above, on kids that are going to go towards the pros. But we really do neglect the grassroots. And maybe not the kid who's, not totally in love with the game, loves it to play it and have fun with his friends, but we really don't spend that kind of time on house leagues and things like that. Should we be spending more time on that? Because that is our fan base.
I agree. I think that's a true thing. I think we're kind of in an awkward time period where we're seeing the transition of like we're almost kind of trending towards the hockey demographic of how it's all kind of paid programs with elite coaching, blah, 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 all that stuff, right? So I think that's a positive thing from a standpoint of growing our sport also. And kind of the reality is all these next generations are hypothetically probably going to be better players than we ever were, right? Because they're getting further and further developed as athletes and as the game develops. But I think there is something to be said that it's hard when you're trying to grow registration and stuff like that.
Right. A question from one of our fans. Toronto Rock had a team downtown. Now we have two in the GTA and smaller barns. Do you think there's an advantage to putting more teams in markets, in hot markets, and spreading the league out?
Yeah, I think it's kind of figuring out though the numbers of how do you do that without diluting it, right? I think we kind of saw Jamie not necessarily too happy about a team going to Oshawa, but obviously for the overall of the league, it's been a success, right? So I think it's kind of finding the numbers of getting teams out of those really weak markets and getting them into the Oshawas and locations like that, but not hurting our owners too much by diluting the pool, right? Because if we have teams 40 minutes apart, it's hard to maintain your ticket sales and stuff like that helps them run their business and pay their players.
Right. Yeah. Jamie was memorable on Lax Class talking about how the Oshawa team really did, and watching it live, it did really cut into it. And I worry when we talk about Laval, how great that's going to be. Will that cut into Ottawa's fan base? And out west again, you're talking about putting a team in Seattle, and will that hurt Vancouver? And it's great to have all these things in there, but there's a big wide North America.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables, right? There's a lot of variables, and I think kind of Edmonton will be one that we're all kind of interested in. And I think a lot of us for a long time have felt like that might be a market for a team. So with that Georgia-Calgary game, we'll really get to see kind of how that sticks. And then hopefully, if it's a success, the Oilers ownership group is maybe more interested in kind of dipping into the league. But I think our biggest thing is we can't have the Fort Worths, right? Like the reality is, as much as it sucked to lose a team and 25 jobs and all the people that work for the organization, as a whole, we can't grow if our weakest link is that weak, right? Like I don't think it's like 100% you're only as strong as your weakest link, but it definitely is kind of one of those things where we can't drag the dead weight. So figuring out the scale of how many teams we can have while they're all still a profitable / functioning business.
You're on mute, Frank.
Yeah, it goes to what you were saying, Christian, before about you don't want to show empty stadiums. Perception is everything. There has to be advancing the way teams are brought in, and the league has been smart about that. They've not brought teams in to suck for 3-4 years. They brought teams in to be successful and give them a chance to survive and do much better. And that's what has to happen. You can't just bring teams in because there's an owner that wants to bring it in. It has to be a success from the beginning because it impacts on every team.
Yeah, and I think it's just like it's a scale, right? Like it's not necessarily like the science that every single team that we bring in is going to be a hit, right? I think the reality is, though, just when our league's maybe not 1,000% stable, let's not bring in 3 teams in 2 years, right? Stuff like that. And we obviously kind of saw with our previous commissioner that we expanded very rapidly, and that was a big goal at that point. But we're seeing now that maybe we got to be a little bit more methodical / fix some of our current teams first.
That's what Brett Frood was saying when he was on also, is before he starts expanding, he needs to make sure that everybody here is stable. And of course, since then, we've lost Panther City, we've moved New York, we've moved Albany. So trying to get these places into stable things. One thing that worries me a little bit also is that we've gone from places like Scotiabank Arena, places like where you're playing in Vancouver, and we've gone into AHL arenas. So there is only 6,000 seats. So the ceiling is only so high, pardon the pun, for how much these teams can make on a live crowd. which brings the pressure back to getting a TV contract before teams start seeing money.
I agree with that. I think what we're seeing with those teams moving out of big market arenas is just the rent is way too high. And the reality is, if with like the ACC and stuff like that, right, you have the Raptors, you have the Maple Leafs that are first priority over you. So when your rent's super high and you're getting a Sunday game at 12 o'clock, it's hard to make your money back, right? You're not getting the same concession cuts. You're not getting your parking, stuff like that. And I think that's why you see the Buffaloes being successful, Calgary, Van, Colorado, like all these teams that are NHL ownerships that own their arena. They already have the staff. They already have all of the infrastructure. That's how we stay into those big arenas. And that's kind of why I touch based on like the Edmonton Oilers. Like, I don't see us being a successful league in Edmonton unless it's owned by them, right? Or owned by somebody who has kind of that background and the facility for it.
He makes a good point here also with the NHL arena and having not a big attendance. It's a little bit daunting when you're sitting there in basically your own section, and it makes you kind of think, did I come to the wrong place? So yeah, I understand that, and making sure we have these barns that look full, but in the same respect, we have to give them a fair base to try and make some money too. And there are different layers now, as opposed to say in Mill, where you threw down a carpet, open up the doors, and prayed people come in the doors. Now, at least with some TV revenue, with Fanatics and other merch sales and other things going on in social media, there is some more towards it in sponsorships, but not nearly enough yet to really push us over that limit, I think.
Yeah, 100%. We're still a growing league. And I think as players, it's important that we understand that too, right? Like, we're fortunate that we have owners that are investing money into these businesses and trying to make it work and trying to make it success. And they see the opportunity and the upside, but it's one of those things that I don't see happening overnight. And there's going to be hiccups. There's going to be teams folding. There's going to be teams relocating, stuff like that. But as long as we're moving in the right direction, I think we can't complain.
Right. The other thing now is, looking towards this season, you've had a couple of weeks off, and before you get going next week, is it hard to keep yourself through the holidays already and having 2 consecutive bye weeks? Is that it's a little strange for scheduling?
Yeah, it's a part of our league, right? It's not uncommon. So I think it's one of those things that it is kind of unfortunate. As much as it's like it's nice to be rested, I think at a certain point you're as rested as you can be, and you're waiting to kind of get back to it. And obviously, we'll be going into Calgary, right? Who's played the last 2 previous weekends. So there's no point complaining about it or overthinking it. Your schedule's your schedule. I don't think we feel like we got the short end of the stick or anything like that. You just look at it and you do your best to be prepared and ready when the time comes.
Right. I look at a team like Buffalo, who had basically bye week game last year at the beginning, and then had to play 12 games in 10 weeks to finish the season before going into the playoffs. And it's like, well, if they can do it and win, right, y'all can do it.
Yeah. Well, I think if it falls in that category, right, of like, I always jokingly make fun of buddies and stuff, like you win by 2, you don't complain, right? You lose by 1, then you're complaining about the ref, or you're complaining about your schedule, stuff like that. Like, when you're on the winning side, there's no excuses.
Right. Talk about the just before we wrap up, talk about the camaraderie right now in the Warriors dressing room, because a lot of guys are very familiar between junior and between playing together in the NLL. This is a pretty tight-knit group now, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's kind of feels like the old days in Calgary, which is the nice thing, right? Not only from like kind of a personnel standpoint, but just some of the vets and the Ryan Dilks, Matt Beers, Midski, all these veteran leaders, right? Where it just kind of shows the younger generation, hey, this is like how things should be, and this is how our dressing room operates, and the overall buy-in, right? Like when we go for a team dinner and there's 3/4 of the team there, right? It's one of those things that's awesome, right? To be around the guys. And I think that's something that it's an important box to check. And I think there's a lot of teams that kind of have that vibe and feeling around the league, which is awesome for our sport.
Right. The other important box to check is, like the CFL, you guys are very, very fan-friendly, shall we say, and easy to get a hold of, and very, very gracious with your time, like doing the show here, and I really appreciate that. How much do you think that the social media and the podcasts and things that you're doing as well are important as to growing this game further?
Yeah, I wouldn't say our personal podcast, I wouldn't say is important that we do with me and Tino and Pacer, but I think guys like you guys that do this stuff, right? It's really important when you reach out that players make the time because you're part of pushing our sport forward, right? You guys are kind of the people that are covering it, pushing it on social media, Twitter, covering trades, stuff like that. So it's one of those things that as much as you can when you are available as a player, you need to do these things. And I think the secondary thing is just with the fans, like the reality is we are more accessible, right? We're not an NHL player where you don't see us in public or we're not on the floor around players after, stuff like that. So that's something that we really have to commit to help grow our game and kind of make people more invested in us.
That's something I hope never changes when we get bigger too, because that's one of the magic things about the lacrosse community and the players is that how accessible they have been and how accessible they are, which make you guys real people. And people are very invested in you guys because of that.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those fun things, right? Like even for me as a general contractor, right? Like there's like local building stores that I go to for the longest time, right? And eventually they kind of figure out when I got traded to Vancouver, they figure out that I play lacrosse and stuff like that. And there's a lot of questions of like, well, why do you still work, right? And stuff like that. You have to explain to them, hey, it's a growing league. Like it's the world's greatest part-time job, but it's still a part-time job right now. So I think it's kind of a fun dynamic when you cross paths with people and they don't realize that you're technically a pro player.
My wife calls herself a lacrosse widow because I'm on the road every available moment trying to get to different arenas and different things and being part of Ontario series as well. That I'm on the road a lot in Ontario all through the summer. So it's, I leave a picture on the table. Just don't put my stuff on the lawn. I'm still coming home.
That's funny. Make sure
I
she's
really
coming back.
Yeah, just to make sure it's not on the lawn. But I really want to thank you for taking the time. I know it's a busy time of the year with all the holidays and everything like that. Happy New Year. Wish you the very, very best for the remainder of the season. And I really see some great things coming for you guys. And hopefully we can have you on again at some point in the not so distant future.
No, I appreciate you guys having me on. And like I said, I appreciate how much you guys do for the game, right? And just covering it and marketing and helping grow our sport. So it's something that doesn't go unnoticed.
Well, we appreciate what you do. That's for sure.
Thank
Christian,
you.
last question for you. If you had a wish to come true for you and lacrosse, what would it be?
That's tough. I've been pretty fortunate. I think obviously winning one in Vancouver would be pretty special, but I look back and even like kind of the last 2 or 5 years, just having the opportunity to play for Team Canada, stuff like that really humbles you, and you realize like how fortunate I've been in my career and how grateful I am for not only the people that invested time in me, but the opportunities I've had to play this game. But I'd probably say winning in Vancouver would be the top of the list right now.
Well, here's hoping you get your dream come true. And thanks for being here. We really thank you for taking the time to join us. And thank you for the compliment.
No worries.
Absolutely.
We appreciate our compliments.
Fair enough.
All right. He's Christian Del Bianco. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci, and he's Gary Groob. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you again next Thursday.
Thanks.